And so I'd like to invite our panelists up. Some are repeats, but some new panelists on the panel will be Rabbi Judith Seid from California, Rabbi Eva Goldfinger, and Rabbi Denise Handlarski from Toronto, and Madrich Harold Launder from Minneapolis. Please join us on the stage. Also, if you have questions, if you had a chance to write them down, I'm happy to take those on my way around.
Karen, I want to thank you for that very illuminating and also, I would say a presentation that allows for both the seriousness and the levity of what life gives us. I have so many questions. I didn't know where to start. But I thought I'd start with something that kind of takes us back to secular humanistic Judaism, and that is for the 30 plus years that I've been working with intermarried couples, we've started to devise terminology that I find to be very helpful. And that is the difference between intercultural and interfaith experiences. I typically will get a call from someone who says, I want to get married, I'm Jewish, my partner isn't, and we don't want anything religious at our ceremony, so we don't want to break the glass. And I always start with, well, please explain to me what's religious about breaking the glass. So introducing this whole notion of culture, I've discovered is very, very helpful, and I just am curious as to what you found out in regards to that idea.
Thank you for the great question. And I should have mentioned before that as you may wish that you had chosen my career path, I wish I had chosen yours. So we're even. So we're even. So as far as the intercultural, and I'm so glad you asked this, and in many ways I think Paul will be able to speak to this even better and in more depth than I may be able to. I think that it is so often intercultural rather than interfaith, and particularly with regard to Jewish women who married non-Jewish men or Christian men or men of no faith, or as I asked one woman what the religion of her husband was, and her response was, he's an engineer. Okay. So in those cases, it was really faith, no faith. Therefore, intercultural, absolutely. And then in terms of Jewish men and the women of other backgrounds who they married, in particular, in the section in my new book in which I write about, and I have to give credit to Paul here, Japanese, Jewish men who marry Asian women. It's really the confluence of cultures. It truly is deeply intercultural in terms of what they're learning and celebrating in terms of their heritages. However, they are also 100% Jewish. So, it works, and it works well for many, many people.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? I'd like to follow up on that because that was one of the things that really struck me when I was reading that book, is that I have only anecdotal experience, but I live in the Bay Area, and I know a good number of Jewish-Chinese couples. Mm-hmm. And in all of them, and they go both ways, Jewish man and Jewish woman, in all of them, the children's primary identity is Chinese. They go to Chinese school, they don't go to Jewish school. Their Jewish identity is through family celebrations, not necessarily in their own home, but in the home of their Jewish grandparents. Mm-hmm. And that what you described seemed really different from the anecdotes that I know. And I was wondering if you thought that it had to do with the distance from the old country, that the number of generations removed you are has a difference in where the primary identity of the children is going to go.
That's a great question. I really think that certainly if the Chinese member of the couple, you're suggesting is more of a recent, either the child of immigrants.
Immigrant or child.
Okay. So there would be that stronger connection. But what I'm wondering about these families is whether, when you say goes to Chinese school, doesn't go to Jewish school, what are they actually practicing in the home? I mean, are they celebrating Shabbat in any way, shape, or form? They're not. So okay, and so how are they? Are they self-identifying as Jewish and Chinese, or Chinese and Jewish? Yeah.
The kids I know will say they're Chinese and Jewish,
Okay. And by Chinese,
but they don't know what
mean?
they mean by that. By Chinese, they mean speaking the language.
Okay.
And by Jewish, they mean they have grandparents. I think.
So can I jump in? This is kind of my thing. So there's a lot going on. So as far as the generational thing, it's not just Asians. It was Jews too. If you line up the how many generations Jews have been in this country, intermarriage increases dramatically after the third generation. I'm seeing now in the organized Jewish community some real pride in how well the Russian American Jews are doing in terms of their low intermarriage rates, and I'm thinking they just got here. Yeah. Give them another generation and let's see how that is. So it's the same in the Asian communities as well. There's a rabbi of Japanese descent on Long Island who does not speak a word of Japanese, is much more connected to his Jewish identity, I believe, he said, than the knowledge he has, and he's third generation Japanese American. So I think that's the case for all Americans, and it's a message that we don't love to hear a lot in the Jewish community, that we're just like everybody else. But in that regard, we really are. And then as far as Jewish Asian, this is just my personal anecdote. My wife is Japanese, and Karen mentioned Jupanese, which is what I call our household. And we have a 2-year-old, and so here's the challenge, is that you can instill a Jewish identity by just telling the kid you're Jewish over and over again, and then they'll say back to someone, well, I'm Japanese and Jewish. Now, you can drill down and say, well, what does that mean to you? Do you do anything Jewish, et cetera, et cetera? But the actual knowledge of who you are and where you come from is fairly easy to do. It's a lot harder to have that kid speak fluent Japanese. So if we want that, we have to be involved in a Japanese community. We have to send him to a school where he's going to learn Japanese. And so initially, there's actually a deeper investment on that side of it if we want to make it, whereas it feels a little bit easier to be Jewish. They're going to be at Hanukkah, they're going to be at Passover Seder, it's going to happen through osmosis, that kind of thing. And I think there's one more piece that's happening that I want to mention, which is race. And in America, you just can't avoid the race. And if they look Asian, they're Asian in America. I mean, our president filled out on the census that he's black. He's not black, he's white and black. He made a choice, maybe a political choice, maybe a personal choice, to only fill in black, African American. That's going to have a big impact on identity, and the family may be feeling that if they want to be involved, in that case, in the Chinese community, we need to do the things to make sure that this child is comfortable fully being a part of that community, and then we'll try to figure out the Jewish part. And on our end, as a Jewish community, we generally tend to fall down when people don't look Ashkenazic, with things like saying, funny, you don't look Jewish, which is not funny anymore, but people still say that. So in that regard, it may actually be harder for them to integrate into the Jewish community than to the Chinese community.
Can I speak? Having done thousands of intermarriages, I think that we lose track of identifying differences between identity, which simply means the person's able to say, I am. And it's very easy to say, I am Jewish, I am Chinese, I am Christian. And the second element, what they do, I do Jewish, I do Christian, and what that means in terms of the society and the family. But the part that we forget about a lot, and which I think is the most significant part, is I love. So, do I love the fact that I'm Jewish? Am I interested in it? Do I find meaning in it? So, with the rabbis speaking through the tops of their mouths very often, what we're hearing is that the most important part is you got to do Jewish. Show up at the synagogue, light candles, cut the challah. Now, okay, you have to be able to say what I love to do is to do Jewish. But if doing Jewish isn't interesting, isn't meaningful, then you're not going to love to do it. So what we need to look at when we're dealing with intermarriage is, what do people today in 2014 love to do? If they love to go out and eat, then let's go to restaurants and do Jewish there. So I have an appointment to do Havdalah in a new Jewish restaurant called Essen downtown. Now, it's going to be open to anybody who wishes to come. But I thought, okay, this is a good way for you to get the Jewish restaurant part out, but we're going to do a Jewish thing in this restaurant that is going to welcome anybody and everybody. So that's going to be fun for those who like to eat out. There are people who love to go to their mothers or mother-in-laws every single Friday night. There are those who hate it, but there are those who love it. And so I think that what I'd like to recommend to all of us is, let's start focusing on what do you love to do. If a little kid loves to play hockey, let's do Jewish together with the hockey.
Miriam, I was going to jump in for a sec. So, Kieran, one thing that Judith highlighted is the challenge of anecdote versus data. Right? The joke line is that the plural of anecdote is not data. That just because you have an anecdote, I have another anecdote, and back and forth. The other bugaboo, of course, is the battle between qualitative research and quantitative research. Quantitative is statistical, you get percentages. Qualitative is the in-depth kind of studies, which is what you did in your survey. So when you said most Jewish men, it was most Jewish men of the survey body that you did, and you're very clear about that in the books and in your presentation too. And so one anecdote of mine that I don't know if is reflected in statistics, I don't know if anyone's ever done the statistics, is the question of identification based on the gender identity of the children with the parent. That is, if the father is Jewish, a lot of the quotes in your book were about their sons. My son is Jewish because I'm Jewish. And the challenge may be that if part of modeling identity is gender identity with the parent of the similar gender, that maybe the ethnic or religious identity may come out in that way as well. And it's an interesting challenge for us because it's sort of that nature and nurture thing. No matter what you put into them, they're going to spit out something maybe different than what you planned, no matter how you've chosen to raise them to identify. So I think that that's one of the challenges to grapple with. And it might be interesting to hear just for a short piece about how you found the people that you worked with in your study, where they were, because I know one set was in Boston and one set was in Ann Arbor, both of which are very college-intense atmospheres. The San Francisco Bay Area is a very different dynamic. There was a study on half Jewish, half Asian couples that was done, I think, in Seattle or somewhere in the Pacific Northwest that, again, had a different kind of vibe to what Judith was reporting. So talk a little bit about context and samples and that kind of thing.
Sure. Okay.
Into the mic, though.
Yeah. Okay, so the work of Professors Noah Levitt and Helen Kim, which hopefully will be a book and more accessible to everybody in the not too distant future. Helen Kim is Korean and her husband Noah is Jewish, and they're raising a Jewish child. And their work is qualitative as well. There hasn't, to my knowledge, been the kind of quantitative work that would, back up statistically the qualitative conclusions that they come to, which is, similar to what I said. That's an incredibly important point about the identity related to the gender of the parent. And that's something that I keep asking the quantitative researchers, and I keep asking, and I think they're getting closer. I know when I asked Pew about it, they hadn't broken it out that way, and then they did break it out that way, and then it was statistically insignificant. So, so that that makes it very difficult. Certainly, I'm very, very curious about that. I do think, in addition to the gender of the parent, I just want to emphasize, I think it depends on the kind of relationship, right? I'm thinking about one man who was raised Orthodox and who he was raised by someone who his father primarily, who he considered an authoritarian German, who was also a Holocaust survivor. And there's a section of my book about second gens, and that's a whole, there's a lot there. But the only Jewish thing he remembered doing with his father was going to synagogue. That was really it. So the gender, the parent, the relationship between children and parents. As far as the people who participated in my studies, yes, so the women were all living in Boston at the time that I interviewed them. I was commuting Boston to Providence at the time, and that's where I was able, and it was the greater Boston area, but still Boston, 13, I think, Boston communities. And then the work on men was done all with men who at the time were living in Ann Arbor. However, I want to emphasize that in both cases, they hailed from all over. So speaking to the most recent study about men, they came from all over the U.S. and Israel. Ann Arbor has, it has a base, but it also has a very transient community. People are coming and going for all kinds of reasons. And certainly, the two cities do have that kind of university town or city in common. And what's helpful about that, and here's where I relied on a sociological theory by Milton Gordon, which is called transferability, and this idea that the people living in these communities and the people who share their experiences with me, that those experiences transfer or connected to other similar communities, that have Jewish networks or other kinds of organizations that kind of make their experiences either similar to experiences that are being had elsewhere or replicable. So if we think about the transmission of Jewish identity and the access to organizations and inclusion and being genuinely welcoming, and as one rabbi said, when I asked him, how are you welcoming? And he said, well, we're so welcoming, we're so inclusive that it's just the way you are. You don't think about it anymore. And certainly that's something that we can learn from and do more of, so that people really want to belong and be part of, and also to validate their experiences so that people who may have had negative experiences in the past but have an opportunity to interact with a rabbi or another Jewish leader and feel like they're wanted and they're important.
So Harold and then Denise.
I just want to make 2 points. One, kind of a mathematical point. There's always this assumption that with increasing intermarriage, there's going to be the Jewish race is going to be the second Holocaust. We all read that. If the average couple has 2 children, if you have a Jewish and a non-Jewish person that marry, there's 2 kids. Mm-hmm. If they marry outside, there's 4 kids. So it's really an opportunity for Jewish growth.
It's called intermarriage math.
Right. and secondly, I'm from Minneapolis, and in that area we had, for many years, virtually all the rabbis in town refused to officiate. And now recently there are a number that will officiate, but only if they swear they'll raise the child as Jewish. And I'm wondering if some of the loss is related to not being welcomed by the Jewish community, and they certainly are welcomed by the Christian community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you want me to respond or no? Yeah, I mean, the issue of officiation is a big thing. I think, whether, and I see it from both sides, I really do. And if a rabbi, for whatever reason, is not comfortable or willing to officiate, he or she is not willing or comfortable. But the key is, how do they respond when they're asked? And what resources do they point that person who's asking them to? Because there are people who will. And so, that's an incredible opportunity. And certainly, I think, there are those, some are my distant colleagues who argue that, we've done enough outreach, we've done enough welcoming. I would say no, we have not, and we can continue to do more and need to, so that people truly feel, not only welcome and included, but wanted, really wanted.
I felt while you were speaking a strange discomfort with the clear feminism, and it's strange for me because I'm such a feminist in my own thinking. And in both of your books, it seems like what you're talking about relies on a sense that it's because Judaism is so home-based, it's the parent who's able to make things happen in the home who gets to determine the religion or culture. That's not news. But so the reason women are allowed to be still Jewish in your language and raise Jewish children is because they're being those super moms like you showed in that graphic. And the reason why it's a challenge for men is because of the norms of masculinity. So I agree and I get all of that. My question is, if we do achieve greater gender equality and equity, do you think then it's a threat in some ways to Jewish continuity? Because although there may be more men who are able to raise Jewish children, women won't, and I'm just wondering how you see that balancing out in the future. Do you know what I'm asking here?
Yeah, you mean I can't argue it both ways?
You can argue it both ways, but if you care about both Jewish continuity and feminism, does one, in these terms, threaten the other, according to the numbers and your research?
No. And the reason is because, and I believe this deeply, personally as well as professionally, is that Judaism has so much to offer and is so beautiful, and the history and the heritage and the allure is so deep that it will work in tandem with feminism rather than against it or vice versa, and that by enabling, empowering, and franchising men to have that closer relationship with domestic Judaism and with their children, there's no negation going on. Do you know what I'm saying? Sure.
Because there was one moment, the one moment in particular that struck me was the language you used about how men presented an ultimatum to their non-Jewish partners. And so if we lived in a world where women weren't so willing necessarily to submit to those sorts of things, would that mean those kids don't get to be Jewish? Do you know what I'm asking? Yeah. There were certain moments, the sexism with the scene with Charlotte, I mean, all of that, I thought, wow, if we had real equality here, I could see some of these families not being Jewish.
Okay. I think, the reason it seems to work in Judaism's favor is in part because of what I said a moment ago, but also I think it's because of the reasons that when Jewish women intermarry, and they're marrying engineers, okay, there's no competing force there, okay? So it may be intercultural, but it's not necessarily interfaith. When Jewish men are marrying women, they are, and I switched my language from Jewish women who married Gentile men to Jewish men who married Christian women. These are women of faith, of strong, and some are of strong faith, okay? But interestingly, they have a real desire to create homogeneity within their family, and to do that by they don't feel, based on what they shared with me, that they're leaving their own religion. They feel like they're better able to express it by creating a Jewish family or by agreeing to raising Jewish children, whether or not they themselves become Jewish. That's what I see.
Can I just try to answer that for you for just 1 second? Because you said something in your... sorry. You said something in your talk which I think answers her question better.
Please, by all
And-
means. I put a lot of thought into that, and so yes.
You had said that there's an increasing move towards men actually becoming literally more domestic. Am I correct? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
So I think that part of that domesticity is it's not the gender, it's the domesticity that's required in order for there to be attention paid to the Jewishness or Christianness or whatever it is of the children. So if you have that egalitarianism, true egalitarianism, you'll have not increased feminism or femininity among men or less masculinity, you'll have more domesticity or an interest in creating the family or the domestic things that are required. So I agree with her that the correct answer to your question is no.
Absolutely, and if I might just add, I'm reminded of a comment by a man who said that after he was divorced, actually, and it was in part through becoming a single parent that he realized he wanted to model for his children everything. He wanted to, not to be the father figure or, not the mother. It was really about, in many ways, it's about becoming more human, right? So that's what he wanted to show his children, was the full realm, the full scope.
First of all, thank you. It was intriguing, interesting, thought-provoking. Thank you. I have a few questions. Do you feel that they know how to, either the women or the men, if they... my question was if you think that they know how to create a Jewish home, if they feel they have the tools, are they confused? That's a question for both men and women.
May I answer that before you go on?
Sure.
First of all, there's no one Jewish home, right? So there are many ways to create a Jewish home. If they don't, and I think, part of it entails our own flexibility in terms of understanding that there are, various variables at play. And I'm thinking of one man who was upset, actually, that his wife couldn't make their home smell Jewish, and moved closer to his mother so that perhaps his mother's cooking would rub off a little bit. I was thinking maybe he needed to learn to cook. Okay. But, I think that they may not know how, but maybe they can create new recipes. And, or learn old ones, or both. But I also think that it's something that there's this incredible gendered piece of it. And this is where my heart goes out to men, and part of why I've come to believe that it is much harder to be an intermarried Jewish man than an intermarried Jewish woman, is because they are expected to know everything. And this relates to why men don't stop and ask for directions, because they should know. Well, there is no GPS to Jewish life yet, although I'm sure somebody is working on that. But the point is that I really feel like we need to get the message out that nobody knows everything and nobody is expected to know everything, and that it's okay to learn alongside your children and with your children, and that does not infantilize anybody.
I totally agree with every single word you said. I was wondering about your sense of what they feel, rather than the answers we can give them. I totally agree with what you said. But I was asking, Do you feel that they're confused? Do you feel that they feel weakened? Do you feel, or completely?
They're not, they don't feel confused or weakened. I'd say ambivalent is the word, but also angry and in pain. And that's what I heard behind a closed door. And you know, and I know when I've spoken about this elsewhere that, you know, men are nodding when I say that, and they come up to me afterwards, and it's like, there's this sort of untapped well of emotion that they haven't been enabled or allowed to express. And that's why, you know, so many men literally just called, emailed, and they were so grateful that somebody actually was interested in hearing about their experience and their side of the intermarriage story. I didn't have to shake any trees as someone, oh, you know, they won't come, you're not offering an incentive, and they're too busy, and, you know. Well, they came.
I wanted to add a couple of the comments from the audience. Can I just do a couple of short ones? Directly relates to what you were saying. One question asked to talk more about the or the Jewish masculine mystique, that idea of, I mean, what I would call the tsuris without a name, that people are feeling and they don't. And I think you talked about it very beautifully. They also ask a couple of questions. I just want to. We don't have time because I want to give Sivan time to respond, and we're near the end of the session. They ask, why are Jewish men in demand and non-Jewish women going on JDIT? I know you have a section about that in your book, and so I think the shortest answer to that is read the book. And another question that's a deeper one, even that we have time maybe for another colloquium, is what happened to make being Jewish so empty during the past war years, and how did that affect Jewish men and women? And you talked a little bit about alienation and also sometimes lack of knowledge or lack of self-authority, to feel like they have the right to be the Jewish authority for their children. That's also part of the challenge of creating a vibrant and meaningful Jewish life that we talked about in terms of loving Judaism and building Jewishness together. And the last comment I wanted to share from the audience is the question of racial ethnic identity. She points out that, you know, we seem to fall back on the Nazi terminology of race when it comes to being Jewish, that the quote from Harold Kushner you mentioned at the beginning is problematic as well. And we're in an interesting position as humanistic Jews because we celebrate Jewish peoplehood but not Jewish race. So what does that mean when you are celebrating an ethnic Jewish culture in a de-ethnicized Jewish community, or we're celebrating you know, a sense of a connection to Jewish people without a genetic claim or an eliminatable claim? That is, you can resign, you can sign out, but you can't do that if it's biological. So these open up a lot of questions, and that's what's great about a colloquium, is we open up questions that go far beyond the topic at hand. So, Sivan, last word, please.
A question for us is to think about our bar mitzvah training, about what do we challenge both the girls and the boys about what it is for them to be a mature Jew, and what it is for them to be responsible, and what kind of tools can we give them when they're kids to start thinking about that rather than to wait. So it's a question for us. And another question for you. One of my colleagues did a survey in Israel about who decides who officiates the wedding. And I'm wondering if you encountered questions like that, and do you have any information about who makes the decision? Is the wedding going to be officiated by a man or a woman? Is the wedding going to be Jewish or not, and what kind of Jewish? It is mostly up to women in Israel. And I am even though the ratio of officiants is vastly more men are chosen to officiate weddings than women. So I'm interested in all these barrio questions.
We have a lot to talk about. Let's see. Briefly. Should I respond to the audience or to the Sivan? Okay. Maybe I can work backwards, or I'll just respond to the officiant question. I think I talked more about the weddings themselves in my book on women than in the book on men. One highly gendered difference is that when a man sought an officiant, so if the person in the equation, the Jewish person, is a man, and he sought a Jewish officiant and was turned away, turned down, otherwise insulted, rejected, or made to feel, less than, that could have been it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Whereas with the Jewish women, if they were turned down, they kept looking until they found someone willing to officiate. So that's one difference that I saw.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think one thing that I've found over the years, Sivan, is that if the Jewish man doesn't call, his mother does.
Yeah. Yes.
This is true. Really?
So more about the Jewish masculine mystique. I like Saris without a name. I think that it's really hard. I think that, I'm building obviously on Betty Friedan's work, trying to, because it changed a lot. I'm hopeful that my work will change at least a little or help. I think that, it has to do with this false kind of binary and this false construction of gender, particularly as it relates to American manhood and men needing to feel not just in charge, but also that, somehow bigger really is better. Yeah. Well, it's not. More is not always. Sometimes less is better than more. But, it's like these are conversations that we need to have, and we need to help people reconceptualize them to empower men. But when I asked the physician who I quoted toward the end of my talk, who said, he's at work 60, 70 plus hours a week, and it's not possible kind of thing for him to be more actively involved in raising Jewish children. And I asked him, so what would it take? What would it take? What would it involve? And he said, I'd need a brain transplant. Okay, so he's, being very honest. I think that, we're not going to do brain transplants, but hopefully the Jewish communities will find ways to reach out to people where they are and empower them, and men in particular, to feel like they can do it, and that it's part of being, a Jewish father, to kind of reconceptualize the role and empower them so that the mystique gets demystified, and so that they feel more enfranchised.
I want to tell you what I love the most about Karen's work is that we've been doing things pretty well in secular humanistic Judaism over the years. We've been in the forefront of officiation, of accepting Jewish descent by either parent and by self-affirmation, of creating welcoming communities for intercultural families. We have plenty of families in my congregation. I don't know which one is Jewish because we don't ask and we don't differentiate. But we still learn something from the work that you did, and from your presentation today, and from the books that you've written. The rest of the Jewish community has a lot more to learn, I think. But I think that the fact that you're able to come into this setting and to provide us with enlightenment and insight into this dynamic is a really special gift. And so we thank you very much for being here. I want to thank our panelists as well. I want to thank our audience. And I want to invite everyone back here at 7:30 for our ordination ceremony for our two new rabbis who will be on the bima tomorrow to respond to Paul Golan's talk. And that way their name tags will say Rabbi, Susan and Rabbi and Klein. I want you all to come back tomorrow.